Hey everyone, welcome back to Admix for another episode of Giving the Game Away. Today, Ian and I are going to talk about player tastes and what makes someone play your game. How are you doing?
I'm very good. How are you, Sam?
I'm doing well, in the office. So very exciting times.
It is very exciting. It's sad that I'm not there. I want to see the office in person.
And do this side by side. That would be
Yeah,
the
it would
ultimate
be a
podcast.
whole new game. Right now, it still looks like I'm talking out of an attic, but that's fine.
There's more and more things piling up behind you every time we do this.
Yeah, it's true. I like to live a cluttered life. Today we want to talk about what makes someone actually start playing a game, because there's obviously psychological models for this. We spoke about what makes someone continue to play a game, what motivates them to keep playing, and that was a great conversation. But it's not the same. The same things don't make you start playing a game, because how can it? You can't be motivated to keep doing something you haven't even started doing yet. And this is a topic that doesn't get spoken about as much, but in a world where user acquisition is so important, it probably should be. I guess we just dive in. There's a developer called Jason Vandenberg, who is a fantastic guy, very clever. He was a designer at ArenaNet for a while. I think he still is. He's done a lot of talks on this topic, and we're going to reiterate a lot of his teachings today because it's really, really good, and has really pushed this field forward a lot, despite him being a game designer, not a psychologist. First of all, the easiest way to think of taste is as a sort of craving. So if you're craving chocolate and you eat chocolate, that craving goes away. Taste is a similar thing. If you have a craving for an action RPG and you play an action RPG, that craving is gone, and that's where motivation kicks in. That's the first major distinction we need to draw. Obviously, once you get a craving satiated, you're not going to keep doing it. That's why motivation is so important. Just important to get that done from the offset. Just drawing a distinction. First of all, though, Jason bases his model off of the Big Five, which is a measure of personality. They score you on 5 factors, which are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And those make up an acronym called for OCEAN. That's how I was taught to remember it. It's interesting. There are tests of this all over the internet. Have you done one, Sam? Have you done your OCEAN?
No, I don't remember. No, I've done similar tests to like assess personality types.
Yeah.
Give you the one that gives you letters.
The Kubler-Ross model. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, but I haven't done this one. No.
So I'm hot take. I prefer Big Five over the Kubler-Ross model. Kubler-Ross model is a little bit pop sciencey. Admittedly, any test of personality is going to have its flaws. You can't take a test like this as gospel because it's inherently a snapshot in time. But if you did it over a long period of time, you'd get a good impression of who a person is. In terms of translating those to gameplay, a snapshot is pretty good. And we've got a link to one of these tests in the article we wrote for this. I'd recommend taking it. It is very interesting. The big thing to take from it is that all of those 5 domains fall onto a scale, a standard deviation scale as well. So you have, for example, agreeableness. You have low agreeableness and high agreeableness, and that creates a bell curve. There's a lot of people in the middle, fewer people on either end. And we'll get into why that's important in a second. Now, Jason used the Big Five model. He them into play archetypes. He basically hypothesized that people with a similar personality type would like the same kinds of games. So if one person's highly agreeable and another person's highly agreeable, they're probably going to enjoy the same things, at least most of the time. And that proved to be mostly true. He found a good correlation for everything except for neuroticism, which is makes a little bit of sense because neuroticism is a weird one. More importantly, he mapped those 5 personality traits onto domains within gaming. So openness meant that a high openness score generally meant that you really enjoyed novelty, and low meant you didn't like novelty as much. Conscientiousness mapped onto challenge as a gameplay trait. Extroversion mapped onto simulation games. Agreeableness mapped onto what he called harmony, which is getting along with people. And neuroticism mapped onto threat, which is how negative the tone of the game is. That one wasn't so well measured, unsurprisingly. So based on what I'm saying right now, Sam, just on these gameplay areas, what would you guess your sort of player profile would be? Where would you guess your taste is based on this?
Definitely openness. I like games that, well, it's funny. I would be on both ends of the spectrum here. I do like, hyper casual games, which is more of a pastime. I wouldn't even call them games necessarily, but I also like this more open field where there's not much of a storyline. You can kind of go out and explore some elements and kind of, let your creativity go wild. So definitely openness. I would say that conscientiousness probably, in terms of how would that express itself over a gameplay, for example? Would that be just...
So conscientiousness maps onto challenge. So highly conscientious people tend to really like challenging games. Low conscientious people tend to lean away from challenge a little bit.
Got it.
Yeah, this is it's an imperfect science, and these are all gonna be impressions of a direction, never like gospel. But it is a really good indication of a person and what they might enjoy. And Jason took all of this, he took all of these maps, and he created something called the engine of play, which is fascinating. So he, remember when I said earlier that all of these traits fall onto a standard deviation, that little bell curve. Basically, you can map that onto a level of how much someone's going to give a shit about that thing. So if you're in the middle of that bell curve, if you're bang in the middle, you are the middle 60%, you're probably not going to give much of a shit if someone says this is a game with lots of fantasy in it, because you don't really care if it's fantasy or realistic. It's just a thing. Whereas if you're in the 15%, the next bracket up, just outside of that 60%, you're going to care a little bit. It's going to be more appealing to you. And if you're in the 5%, on the big extremes of that scale, you're going to be really damn enthusiastic about it being a fantasy game or a realistic game, because you're in a minority. And this engine's really fascinating because it's one of the first attempts at mirroring a personality to a gameplay trait. And he took it a step further, and he took each of those gameplay traits and he split it into another axis. So each personality trait now maps onto 4 things. So, for example, 1 second. So the novelty domain, for example, people who like new things and realistic things, the 4 domains within that are fantasy and realism in the y-axis, and building and exploring on the x-axis. So if you really love novel things, you're going to want to explore a lot, and you're going to want a lot of fantasy. And if you're not into novel, you're going to go the other way. I don't know if I can swear in this podcast. I've never done that before.
It's too late now.
Have I done that? Ah, shit. Well, in for a penny. So that is, if you then draw those standard deviations on both axes, you create this map of how much anyone's going to give a shit about various things within your game. So, you've got a ring in the middle. That's a lot of people. Exactly. There is a huge amount of people in the middle of that map. The next ring out, fewer people, but they care more. And the largest ring out still, like 5% of the population, very tiny amount, but they really, really care. They are a dedicated audience. Now, me saying that there's a lot of people in the middle, you might be tempted to try and market a game to those people. That's not necessarily a good idea. Like, would that be your temptation as a previous game designer, Sam, to go for the big mass market audience?
No, actually, it wouldn't. I think if you market to people in the middle, it's not like they are not passionate about something. It's just that there's not much that excites them in terms of mechanics. So it's easier to create a mechanic that you know for a fact would be a perfect fit for a small audience, right, niche audience, and then grow from there and dominate that niche rather than trying to appeal to the masses without really finding the right trigger to excite them. And in fact, this distribution is something that you can see not only in gaming, but across pretty much every single, everything is distributed in this way. Like you can look at early adopters of a specific product. There's only a few of them. Then you have the early majority, and then you have the late majority as well. The way that product evolved in the marketplace also follow that distribution. And it's always the same. You want to appeal to the early majority. You want to appeal to this small segment of customers where you know what is going to excite them. So I guess if it's some people are very social, they absolutely want multiplayer. Well, you can create the most multiplayer game ever. Or you can do the other way and create a game that you can only play on your own. But in the middle, what does that mean? A little bit of multiplayer, right? It's not as clear cut, and you're not going to be able to answer the need of those customers as easily because they do not really stand for much. They're just hanging about in the middle.
Absolutely, hitting the nail on the head. The further out you go, the more niche your product is, the more people are going to be invested. We'll talk about this more in a minute, but we like to draw everything back to monetization because that's kind of our thing. The people on the outer edges, they're probably going to spend money on your game if you've got in-app purchases. They're going to be committed. They'll play it a lot, especially if you do what you're doing really well. Whereas in the middle, they're just there to pass time. Would you argue that the middle people are hyper-casual players, Sam? Or do you think they are hyper-casual still goes into one of these taste layers?
Well, I guess it depends on what scale, from what to what. Definitely, hyper-casual people are less, attracted to specific mechanics or complicated gameplay, but they're still very much attracted to hyper-casual itself. So I don't think hyper-casual would represent the middle. It would be more one side or the other. The interesting thing about what you said is if you look at the curve, the distribution of spenders on games, it actually has a hyperbolic distribution where you have a lot of people spending close to nothing and a very few select few that actually spend a lot. The 2% that actually spend can make up for 70% of the revenue potentially. And these people in the middle who are not really invested, they're actually perfect to monetize using advertising, right? Because they are not willing to spend anything. The only thing that they're contributing is their attention. And there's a lot of it because it's a huge game. So hyper casual do try to appeal to an audience as wide as possible because they monetize this way.
This is why I'm so fascinated. After reading about taste maps, this is why I'm so fascinated about hybrid casual games, because they're doing a little bit of both. They are, contrary to what you'd expect, they are going for this mass audience, and then they're trying to hook them in. They're not. But
a lot of successful games actually are doing that, and if you look at successful games like Minecraft, right, they literally tick every single box. It's multiplayer, it's solo, it's creation, it's story driven, and so from the outset you could think, wow, okay, let's just do that then. But this is really one in a million, right? To get this right is just extremely difficult. And in fact, it's not really that they appeal to people in the middle, is that they appeal to people on all the edges at the same time. I think people in the middle are still not the power users that you should try to appeal to. So, starting with one side and then expanding to broaden the audience. Of course, this is how you get scale, but definitely try to focus on the couple of mechanics that that your users are interested in.
Well, that's a very interesting point, actually. So you would argue that specializing in one of these specific taste areas, like trying to be the best game about building and then expanding into other areas, is a better way to drive growth than just appeal to a mass audience and then stretch into those areas afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. Like being the best, even at something small, is always good because you build a brand, you build a following. It's not just a bunch of users that would say, oh, this game is okay. You have a lot less users, but that actually, telling like, okay, this is the best game ever. And that is always a positive, right? They will tell their friends. Maybe their friends are not interested in the same mechanics, but eventually you can start building other things for them. So building a loyal following, understanding your audience, building mechanics that work for them is always the right way to build an audience.
I mean, come to think of it, that's exactly what Fortnite did. It started out as a very straight play battle royale, and now it's got as much a social game as it is anything else. They specialized and expanded. Interesting. Yeah, so taste maps are really useful. Exactly the reasons we've just been speaking about. If you map the game you're making onto a taste map, onto all the taste maps, you can see how to market it, how to just communicate with other departments. And our article talks you through doing this yourself. But once you know exactly what your game is good at, you know what kinds of people are going to be interested in it. If you sit down and you really realize that we are one of the best multiplayer mobile games out there, you know that that's probably something you want to put in your marketing materials, because people who care about this, who really care about it, they want to see that. That's what's going to hook them in. And your marketing team will really, really value having that guidance too. We've already spoken about Minecraft appealing on every front. It's a really special case, as you said. Like, it's not a model to follow. It's an example we use to just illustrate how Minecraft became so huge. But the average person can't do everything perfectly like Minecraft has. And even then, Minecraft did exactly what we said Fortnite did. It started by specializing in building and exploring, and now it's become everything else over time.
And that's again, this is just a kind of a blueprint for success, not only for games, right? Amazon didn't start and sell everything from day one. They focused on books. And then when they dominated that category, people knew them because they could always get the book that they want. They started asking, hey, why don't you sell something else? And then they expanded. So, it's too much work to try to do everything at once. And it's better to do one thing great than doing a lot of things in an average way, because people remember, market leader for everything, right? So if you're the best game, even if you have a couple of hundred people following you, that's better than being number 10 and have a million followers. So it's always better to be top of mind, on the conversation. And then from there, if you found success in one niche on one side, you can always try to expand, and hopefully that audience will also come with you.
It's true. Of course, in terms of marketing into a niche like that, especially if you're aiming for one of those like really outer ring audiences, it's a double-edged sword, because it's going to cost a lot more to acquire those users. From a business perspective, they're just going to cost more to target such a niche group of people. So in some ways, you do have to balance up your overall marketing budgets. I think I can predict what you're going to say, Sam. I think it's worth it. Getting those dedicated users is probably going to be worth spending a little bit more, because they're going to be advocates for your game. They're going to spread it themselves, and they might end up spending money because they really care about it. It's just going to be a big initial investment to get them. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. But I think there's almost like a loophole to what you're saying. And this is what the hyper casual guys have found. Again, hyper casual, I wouldn't put them in the middle, because they are passionate about the fact that it's simple and the fact that there's almost no gameplay, and that's just, one type of experiences. So there used to be gamers that were not really interested in games and maybe were dabbling a little bit here and there with games. And then that genre was actually exactly what they looked for. That was the not even really a game, but almost like a pastime. And so they were able to take that niche that is actually huge and then target them for very, very cheap. So this is a kind of a unique customer segment here, because it's very rare that you can find so many users that are actually interested in the product. But again, they're not actually, it's really interesting. Maybe we should do a full podcast analysis of that, because the more I think about it, the more I can't actually fit it properly in this map. I think hyper casual players they're not passionate about one specific game. They're passionate about the pastime. They're passionate about hyper casual as a category almost, which is why you need to constantly create new games, because people fall off very quickly. So it's just interesting to see how that works. But I would still argue that they are kind of one niche, one category, and the game designers are designing games that they know will appeal to those people.
It's true. It's very true. I'm sure they do fall onto the map. It's just really hard to place them how they are now. We should reach out to Jason and see what his opinion is on that.
Yeah, give him a call. Yeah. See what happens.
Yeah. So to conclude the entire section, taste maps are amazing. They're really, really useful. If only for like internal communications purposes. I encourage you to go into the article and make a taste map of your game, just so you can, it'll be like 20 minutes and it could really guide your vision on marketing and monetization and just communication internally. And I really think that's the conclusion that we need to settle on, even with the debate over hyper casual we just had. Give it a go.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ian. This was great. Thanks everyone for following. Please follow us, Admix Play, on all the channels, and I'll see you next week for another episode.